Hello everyone, welcome to another one of our Facebook Lives. We had an event last week, one of our So Kansas events, and we had some women here who were doing some really interesting things. So I thought I would share with you some of the ideas that came out of that event. One woman brought a Brando jacket that she'd made out of a robe that had belonged to her father. And after her father passed, the robe ended up in a warehouse, a little bit moth-eaten. But a few years later, she retrieved that robe and tore it apart, got it cleaned, of course, and tore up the pieces and made a Brando jacket. And I thought that was a really interesting and lovely tribute to her father, and it's a very special garment for her. We had another woman who brought an origami skirt that she cut out 2 years ago and finished. Fit her perfectly, worked out great. And then another woman, Marie, decided to make a Brando jacket. And just as a reminder for what a Brando jacket looks like, it's this garment with the diagonal zipper being placed on the surface of the fabric. It's a lined garment. It doesn't have to be, but we think it's really nice to refine the interior of this garment with lining. So she chose this very interesting fabric that we just got in. It's just on the website as of yesterday. This is a stretch denim base, and then it has a glazing over it in this interesting sort of mountainous, earthy motif with a little bit of a texture of an animal, I think, or a reptile probably. Anyway, this has the look of leather, but it's not leather, it's denim. And she is going to line the garment. She didn't get around to the lining here at the workshop, but it turned out great with one of our zippers with the silver teeth. And we're really excited about seeing that finished product from Marie. And then what usually happens in So Kansas is we gather in the area where we sell the fabric, and people get to pull fabrics and pull them out, look at them. And the same Marie had seen a Johnny Was jacket someplace in her shopping ventures. And the jacket had intrigued her because it was 2 layers of silk. One layer, the top surface, in a burnout or Devereux silk, as they're called officially, layered over a more abstract crepe de chine silk. So I'm going to pull out a couple of fabrics that we pulled out last week to show you kind of what we're talking about. 2 very different textures, very different prints, very different colors, but the way of layering them is really interesting, and it allows you to use those incredibly beautiful Devereux chiffon type fabrics in a way that you might not have thought. So we started with this crepe de chine in a very hand-painted looking abstract design. And then found this particular Devereux fabric, burnout, meaning parts of the fabric is actually burnt away, and stacked them together, and you see that you get a little bit of the abstract design behind it, showing through the burned out parts of the silk. This will make a great flowy jacket. We are actually coming out with a new jacket that you will like here in, I don't know, pretty soon, a couple weeks, I think. So we're thinking flowy jackets for the holidays, for around home. Robe-like kimono-style jackets are very popular right now. So this is one idea for you. Another one is to use a silk such as this. This is actually a silk twill. I love this because it changes character. It's not a panel exactly, but it does change directions a little bit throughout the fabric. And we layered it under this one. You can see how very, very different they are, but it totally changes the character of the surface fabric. So you may have some fabrics in your stash that look really different. You wouldn't think of putting them together as a combination of fabrics, but try layering. I took these Devaray fabrics, which are sheer, and you have to play with them a little bit because it doesn't always work over what you think. I put them over things that were the same colors, and it just didn't work. So, you have to play, and we'd love to do that in our sewing room, I know. That's that about last week. I want to also thank all of you for the incredible amount of orders that we received last week after the fleece promotion from the last week's Facebook Live. It was amazing. And of course, we ran out of certain colors, but we do have them on back order. Some of these fabrics that we're getting these days, and the best ones we think, are coming out of Canada. So of course, our back orders are held up just a little bit. And I appreciate your patience. And we're trying to communicate with people to let you know that back orders do exist, but we will get the fabric to you. We're just having to wait just a little bit longer for these fabrics to come out of Canada, which is frustrating, but you'll get it, we promise. All right, one other little tidbit. There's a woman by the name of Susan Beck, and I know Susan Beck because she was my district manager for Bernina back in the days when I was a Bernina dealer. This has been a long time ago, 35 years ago. And Susan Beck lived in this area, and we communicated, and she was my sales manager. And she moved on, continued to work with Bernina, and she now puts out a blog type email called sewfeet.com, S-E-W feet.com. And if you're a Bernina dealer, you might want to sign up for her news. Yesterday, she sent out a little news about a foot that it was a reminder that there is a foot from Bernina that is an open toe foot. And she uses it for top stitching and edge stitching. And I'd forgotten all about this foot. It's a number 20. And yesterday, the other day, when I was making the jacket that I have on, I was doing a lot of edge stitching and top stitching, and of course using an edge stitch foot. But there are times when you want to be in a slightly different place than even an edge foot can allow you to do. So remember this number 20 foot. This is her favorite foot, she says, and I have dug this out of my assortment of feet, and I'm going to start using this foot because I had totally forgotten about it. But these are the kinds of tips that she gives you on the sewfeet.com site. So you might want to check out Susan Beck and her work. She's really good. All right, today we're going to talk about some edges and some corners. I have on the Chicago jacket, which I made on Sunday. Now, I don't always brag about how long it takes me to make things because I'm not really all that fast of a sewer. And you do have to understand that since I helped develop the pattern, I have a tendency to understand the pattern from the get-go, so I'm not hung up too much there. But by the time I cut this jacket out on Friday, which took about an hour, the cutting out, of course, takes longer than you think, and it should take longer than you think because you always want to do straight of grain and get everything all worked out ahead of time and make sure you have enough fabric and all that. But I sat down at my sewing machine on Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning, went out for a little appointment at about noon, and came back, and I had this jacket finished by 4 o'clock. And I was thrilled that I had a jacket in essentially 6 hours. In the old days, I didn't have 6 hours to sew, but these days, when I'm a little more at home than I once was, then 6 hours is a pleasant way to, excuse me, enjoy a Sunday afternoon, and you can make an entire jacket. Well, we got these new fabrics in that I thought I'm sorry about the frog in my throat. Got these new fabrics in, and they are called a matelasse, and that's what I used to make this jacket. And I'm showing them here on the walls as well. So what is a matelasse? Well, matelasse is a French word for cushioned or padded. It's actually a double fabric with a quilted character that is made on a jacquard loom. So these fabrics have two sides, and I did have to choose which side I was going to use. That probably didn't take me 6 hours, but it took me longer to decide what side to use than probably to do the collar. But one side has a little bit of texture, and the other side has even more texture. Just the nature of the two weaves, the two double weaves, and the fact that it was woven on a jacquard loom, which, by the way, is a French invented piece of equipment to sew complicated, interesting patterns in fabrics. So anyway, you can take a look at whichever one side that you like. For some reason, I liked the side that didn't have as much texture. That's sort of unusual for me, but I went with the more subtle idea. And then I also knew that I wanted to do some top stitching, so I thought the top stitching would show through on the side that didn't have as much texture. I love this fabric because it's the perfect fabric for this transitional time of year. It's cotton and linen. Now, the fact that it's linen, don't be afraid of that. We know that linen wrinkles, and this fabric can wrinkle, but I've had this on all morning. I wore it in my car with my seat belt, and I still feel like I can wear this jacket without feeling the need to press it or revive it in any way. But cotton and linen is perfect for the fall in Kansas, perhaps for your climate as well. And I love having the ability to put on a jacket that I can take off anytime during the day, put back on when I leave the office, throw it in the car. And the Chicago jacket just spoke to me as the perfect fabric for these fabrics. So we have this beautiful kind of blue-gray, my favorite color of all time, the cinnamon color, and a steel gray, these 4 colors. And we have the navy blue. And this is the same kind of fabric, but it's not the strié texture as these other 5, but a fabric that has a little more dimension to it, and you can see that it has an abstract design. And now you can really see that padded, sort of poofy, puffy look to it. But all of these are the same fiber. Again, these come out of Canada. We have these yardages. If we run out, we'll be back ordering that and waiting again and letting you know. But anyway, you're going to love this fabric. But I want to use the Chicago jacket pattern as the basis for talking about some techniques today. I have 2 Chicago jackets on the wall. This is one just out of the package, like I have on, no modifications whatsoever. It has the dart at the center front edge, which is unusual. You rarely see that. There's a dart, a diagonal dart here, a bust dart, that actually connects to a seam that goes into the underarm, and then some top stitching lines that also connect that create the pocket. So get a little better look of that. This one is made out of a ponte knit, a nice mid-weight ponte knit. This one has been lengthened. I don't know how many inches, 6 or 7 inches, I've forgotten. Made that last year, actually. And this is in a French terry. This is the kind of fabric I'm going to be talking about in a couple of weeks because I'm really interested in French terries. It's a very popular fabric right now. But again, a nice little topper or duster for this time of year if you want something a little bit longer and a little more of an outerwear piece. Although, as we talked about last week, you know, these longer jackets people are wearing with their sweatsuits, so who am I to say this is an outer jacket when you can just wear it to the gym as well? So an original version and a lengthened version of the Chicago jacket. So let's talk about some of the elements of the Chicago. There's a collar, a simple collar that's attached, and these fabrics that I'm using have a little bit of thickness to it, so I want to talk to you about how the corners are dealt with. I've blown up the seam allowance on this little sample piece here, so normally you would have a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I sewed it a little bit stronger for the video today, so hopefully you can see it. I have one corner here that's pretty much of a right angle, and this corner is more of an acute angle, such as this collar. So I have first marked my corners with some sort of a marker. I usually use a chalk marker, a chalkener, to mark the connecting point where I turn. For this, I just used a magic marker. I don't suggest that, but I wanted you to be able to see it because I want to know exactly where to pivot. I'm not sewing across the corner as some people do. I am coming to the corner and immediately putting my needle down in needle down position and then pivoting the work and carrying on. I'm not reducing my stitch length. I'm just stitching at a regular stitch length and turning the corner. So let's take this off here a minute, and I'm going to try to do some trimming. One of the things that I've learned about trimming is I like to grade my seams all in one fell swoop. This is awkward for me, but I'm going to see if I can make this work. Get it up here like this. So when you grade seams, that means that you are making the seam allowances two different widths, ever so slightly. And the fabric, the seam allowance that is the widest, is the one that is going to be on the outside of the garment or the top side of the collar. So I take my scissors and I lay them flat, not like this, but like this, and I'm going to cut like this. And hopefully you can see that that yellow, which is the wrong side of the fabric, is ever so slightly wider than the top fabric. Not showing up? Well, trust me, it is. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and trim the corner. Yeah, that's what's tricky about only having one camera position. We have our new filmographer, is that a word? Yeah. Sitting by our side today, studying what we're doing, so we can hopefully make some improvements in the future about getting up close and getting a better look for you. All right, so here's my trimming and my grading. Notice I am not trimming across the corner. I always quote my favorite 7th grade home ec teacher, Mrs. Creasy. Mrs. Creasy taught me, and every other home ec teacher that I ever had after that, in high school and college, taught me to trim a corner across the corner. And then somewhere along the line, a few years ago, I was watching Kathy Davis, who worked here at the time, do it another way, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's absolutely the way to do it. So here's how you turn and prepare a corner. We're going to take this corner and fold it along the stitching line. Press that with your iron for about 1 inch. And then the adjacent corner is pressed down on top of it. So you're stacking 6 layers of fabric, the collar and 2 seam allowances that have 2 layers to them. And that is pressed. That's going to give you a supported corner that when turned is going to look like this. It's filled, it's not hollowed out, it's not dog-eared, and sometimes I might have to use a point turner, but really not very often. It's a matter of putting my fingers inside of this holding that corner down with my thumb and turning it. And see how great that is? And that was just a simple manipulation of my fingers. Didn't have to use a tool at all. If you study the really, really great shirts, men's shirts like Burberry, for example, you know, the $1,500 shirts, and you look at the collars are not dog-eared, they are perfect corners, and there's fabric inside of them. So I use this technique for any weight of fabric, from very sheer to very heavy. All right, so that's a 45-degree angle. What about one that is not? That has a little bit of a different angle to it, as most collars do. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this seam. And by the way, I don't trim as much as some people do. I find that I'd rather have you not trim at all than trim too much. So I'm leaving 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, quite a bit. And I'm still leaving that point. I'm going to fold this, give that a little finger press, and fold it again. This time, I have a little bit sticking out. Let's look at that from this side. There's a little bit sticking out right there. So now, that's what I'm going to trim. I'm going to trim it along the folded edge. And that is all the trimming I do on the corner. I do the same turning process with my thumb, and it'll be perfect, no matter what the angle, from very sharp to less sharp. These seams I would press open before I would turn the collar, and I would do that if it were a straight edge using a point presser, using the rail on the point presser and putting that into the point of the collar. If it's a curved collar, then I'm more likely to use the rail that's on a tailor's board, which is this surface right here. I put the collar over the curved edge. So these are the two pressing tools that I can't live without. If I had to buy one over the other, it would be the tailor's board rather than the point presser. But of course, if you're like me, you have both. What's the problem? This has a lot of other areas in this tool to use, and I'm going to be demonstrating that in another Facebook Live. All right, so let's talk about curved corners. The Chicago jacket doesn't have a curved corner, but a lot of garments do. So now we're going to look at these. So you want to have a nice curve that's not jagged or have little poked out areas. This is the way you trim a curve. Rather than notching it out with clips and then taking out little V's like we're taught in school to do, you want to trim your seams to, again, the 3/8 of an inch or 1/2 an inch, and then through that curved area, which is on the bias, you're going to trim that down to about 1/8 of an inch. And I even try to press that seam allowance open. There are curves along this tailoring board that allow me to place the curve on the board and press this little seam open. Get my bifocals, trifocals going here. So anyway, I'll start it maybe with a little tool like this to get it open, and then my iron is just pressing that open over the curve. And that'll get you a really smooth corner. The other feature of this Chicago jacket is the double fold hem that goes all the way around the front and the bottom of the sleeve. Whoops, can't put my easel away yet. Let's get it back. You've seen this before, but I'm going to show it to you again. Repetition is what I'm all about, I can tell you. It takes me a few times to learn something. So the way you do this hem is to first stay stitch half the distance of the finished hem. So the finished hem is 3/4 of an inch. That means I'm going to sew at first, stay stitching through a single layer of fabric at 3/8 of an inch from the edge. So this is what this drawing represents. 3/8 of an inch. I know it looks wider here, but I've done it for the video. 3/8 of an inch. Then that creates this barrier, or a fence, I call it, that you can use to fold and press with your iron this little bit of hem allowance, the 3/8 of an inch, to the wrong side. You get a nice crisp press right along that stay stitching line. The stay stitching helps support the fabric so that it doesn't stretch out. If you're doing that on curves, it's especially important to stabilize that so you don't get a wavy hem. So then this hem gets turned one more time so that it fulfills that total 3/4 of an inch. And that is what this drawing is all about, turning it one more time. But I don't press this one. This one's pressed with an iron, this one is not. As I'm turning this, I'm putting my needle position down, giving it a little bit of tension coming out of the needle, and that fabric just wants to fold right, it just says, please fold me right here, right now. And then it's easy to sew on the inner fold, and it makes a super quick, even double fold hem. Stay stitch, press with an iron once, twice folded as you're sewing. So that's the perfect double fold hem. Okay. The other, one more little feature of the Chicago jacket is the dart here, and of course the dart here. Don't forget that you're going to want to press your darts one direction, in this case down and towards the side seam, over a hem. a tailor's ham because you want to build in that curve and keep that curve. And you want to press that on the right side of the fabric. That's the most important thing to remember. Don't try to press your darts from the wrong side, because I guarantee you on the right side you'll get a tunnel at the edge of those darts. You want to do it from the right side, that you're pressing against the ridge of the dart, knowing that the fabric that's underneath is going the direction that you want. All right. That is tips for Chicago jacket. I have a lot of techniques in the book that I wrote some years ago called Sewing Edges and Corners. There are 37 techniques in here of how to sew a multitude of edges and corners, from miters to just what we've talked about, to pipings, all kinds of things. So this book is still available, and it's going to be on sale for the next week, which I'll talk about in a minute. So don't forget about my book. We also have some tutorials that are of interest to you. We have one called Perfect Corners, which demonstrates a number of different ways to do the corners, including what I talked about today. That's a tutorial. Our tutorials are PDF format. They're not a video, so it's something that you can print out and keep in a notebook for reference. It's really easy. It's like a slide presentation that you can watch on a handheld device, an iPad or a phone or whatever, or your computer, or you can print it out and keep it as well. The other tutorial that I like to refer to often is one called 5 Narrow Hem Options, and it talks about this double fold hem and how we do that. So you might want to check that out. All right, you have any questions?
Yes. Someone would like to use a zipper on the front of the Chicago. How would you do that?
Someone wants to use a zipper on the front of the Chicago. How would I do that? Well, there are two ways to do it. You could create a facing for this garment rather than the double fold hem. Determine how wide you want the facing and literally insert the zipper into the facing. Or you could use an exposed zipper such as the Brando. In fact, the Brando has both ways actually. This side of the zipper on the Brando is inserted and sandwiched between a facing and the outer fabric. This side, the zipper is on the surface, so you could have an exposed zipper. If you like the tapes of the zipper that you're using, put it on the outside, maybe even embellish it with some decorative thread or decorative stitching or paint it or all kinds of things. So I think either way.
Okay. And could you press the seams, or could you press the seams open then trim it, as opposed to trimming then pressing?
The question is, do I press the seam open first and then trim it, or trim and press? When I'm grading a seam, I'm grading it first and then I'm pressing it open. I don't tend to trim after I've pressed it open. If I'm doing that, it's probably because I forgot to do the pressing, or one or the other. But I would trim it first and press it second.
Okay.
A lot of our seams, by the way, and including on this Chicago jacket, are trimmed as it's serged finished with a 3-thread serge. So the seam allowance, probably can't see this, but the seam allowance is trimmed by virtue of running the serger through it and also wrapping the edge with stitching as well at the same time.
Do you ever use a mini iron?
Do I ever use a mini iron? Only in classrooms when they provide them. I don't own one, so no, I don't.
Are the layers of the collar point pressed towards the upper collar or the under collar?
Are the layers of the collar points pressed towards the under collar or upper collar? Towards the under collar. That's a really good question. I should have said that. Yeah, so you don't want to see those layers on the outside. You want the layers to be on the underside of the collar. So you have to think about which way that is when you're doing that particular technique.
Do you use the templates on the double fold hems?
Do I use templates on double fold hems? The line of stay stitching provides that edge for you to use to press that first fold. You can use a template. You could use a wider template, and you could draw a line 3/8 of an inch from the edge and press the first edge up to that, putting the template on the stay stitching line. But most of the time, I'm not doing that. I think the stay stitching is providing that first guide for you without having to use the template.
Okay, the corner of the Chicago jacket,
Yes.
by the collar, is a tricky part. Can you talk about that?
Who asked that question? Jean Stanley. All right. Yes, the corner of this Chicago jacket is the trickiest part of this jacket. And it's because these two double fold hems come together, but the hem at the top is tapered to go into the seam allowance, so the end of it is covered up by the collar. You still do the stay stitching at 3/8, so you have a guide, and then your first fold is tapered from the 3/8 into the seam allowance, so you know where that is because of the stay stitching. So then when you're folding it the second time, you are still following the stay stitching line, and you have to mark your point where that connection is very accurately with a tailor tack or some sort of marking so that you know that that is tucked inside the seam allowance past that dot. So the marking is important.
I think that's what Marilyn Cruz was asking about too.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is I don't know if you remember whenever I was talking about denim, which I think was 2 weeks ago, I talked about making samples of this in your fabric. The heavier the fabric, the trickier this is. So I suggest that you practice this corner before you practice on your garment. Make a couple of samples of this corner. It forms its own little miter, a folded little miter, but it's not a sewn miter like we do sometimes.
Okay. Full bust adjustment on the Chicago.
Full bust adjustment on the Chicago. I would do a full bust adjustment without a dart so that you are not interfering with the darts that are already there. That's in our fitting the bust tutorial, adding bust fullness without a dart. That is a technique that is clearly in that tutorial.
Okay, they had some questions about this fabric here. If you could show the right side, you were showing the
Oh.
side, which I think you could use both. But,
It would probably be better if I'd shown the right side. Yeah.
But just so they can get an idea what the right side looks like.
Sorry about that. Yeah. You want to see the fabric over it again? Probably even stronger. Can't believe I did that. Does that look better?
Yeah, it really pushes the...
Yeah, a little more strength of the contrast. Yeah.
Okay, a fabric question. When buying fabric that I'm not sure what I'm going to use it for, how many yards would you recommend?
If you're buying fabric and you're unsure of what you're going to use it for, how much do you buy? 3 yards is my go-to yardage when I don't know what I'm doing. You can make, depending on the fabric, of course. If it's a coating, I'm probably going to make a coat, so I'm going to increase that to maybe 4 yards. But if it's a shirt, you're not sure whether you're going to make a shirt or a jacket, 2.5 to 3 yards should do it, depending on the width. If it's 45 inches wide, you're going to be maybe 4 yards. If it's 60 inches wide or 55 inches wide, which is what so many of our fabrics are, 3 yards would definitely get you what you need. If it's a print and has a repeat, you're going to want to know the repeat, and you're going to buy 1 repeat for every major piece that's involved in the pattern. So another half a yard or yard-ish for that.
Let's see. Can you show that Brando jacket again and explain what that fabric is? It's not a fleece.
Now, this is the Brando jacket made in our boucle, which is 60% rayon, 40% wool. We love this fabric. It's a knit, so you can use raw edge techniques on it. I'm going to be doing a Facebook Live on this, lots of colors of it. It's a real standard fabric that we've been carrying for quite some time, and we love it. It kind of molds. It's not too heavy, not too light. It's not like a boiled wool by any means, but it has that flavor of a boiled wool, but it's still drapey and lighter weight than a traditional boiled wool.
Can they see that rust fabric up close?
Sure. Here's the rust fabric up close. And see that sort of earthy design to it. It looks like Kansas in the summer when there's no water on the earth. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it.
Okay.
You want to talk about the...
Yes, so here are the specials for today. We have the Chicago jacket pattern, which is a printed pattern for $18. All the fabrics that I've mentioned here, the matelasses, are 15% off. I love these Omnigrid scissors, and of course I especially love them because they have yellow handles. But I like the size of these. They're 8.5 inches, and they are 15% off. They are made by Kai, actually, and they're Japanese made, and they have that stainless steel edge to them that I really like the feel of these. And they're lightweight. They're not as heavy as some of the bulkier scissors that are on the market today. So these are shears, by the way. I'm calling them scissors. You know the difference, of course. Shears have the 2 different size handles. Scissors have the same. Okay, the tutorials, perfect corners and 5 narrow hem options, $15 for each of those. And the book, Sewing Edges and Corners, is 15% off. And of course, I'll autograph it for you. And that's it.
We do have one other question
actually
about the Marceau. Do you have a sleeve you would recommend if you wanted it to be a simple, plain sleeve?
Do I have a sleeve recommendation for the Marceau top if you want a plain sleeve? I don't yet. That is a good question. I would measure, if I were to approach this and have an answer for you later, I would be measuring the circumference of the arm's eye on the seam allowance, and then I would be measuring, let's say, the circumference of the distance of the sleeve head of, let's say, the ET sleeve or the urban sleeve or one of our other t-shirt patterns, and see if I can get a sleeve that I already own that has, in the case of a knit, no more than 1/2 inch to 1 inch of extra sleeve to circumference. So I would play around with that. It's possible, probably, I haven't looked at it, it might be that you could superimpose the sleeve head of the Marceau onto another sleeve that you like. And that's another way to go. In fact, I like that idea, and then I just thought of that right now.
Okay, that's it on questions.
All right, thanks so much. We'll see you next week.